Thanks for joining me on this video where we talk about why pantheism and idealism matter in the first place. The last video I did was about St. Thomas Aquinas versus the pantheists and the idealists, and that got a little bit of traction. There seemed to be a lot of interest in that. And oftentimes when I talk about these philosophies like pantheism and idealism, I get this kind of reaction where people are like, what's the point? Are there actually pantheists and idealists in the world today? Why do we need to keep talking about this, and what does it matter? And so in this video, I want to talk about the fact that it does matter. And it's important that everybody know what these philosophies are about and also what impact they continue to have in the world today. So that is the goal of this video. And just as a little bit of a recap, I mentioned this in the last video, but when we talk about the philosophy of pantheism and idealism, which I will define and I'll redefine and explain to you what I'm talking about in case you didn't see the previous video, we really are talking about the relationship between God and the created world. And with us being rational, free creatures, we are part of that created world, and we are seeing the world, of course, from our perspective. And so how does it all interplay? God, the created world, and us kind of in the middle of it, observing it and being made to the image and likeness of God. So I'll take them one at a time and get through it as quickly as possible. But pantheism is the belief that the universe and God are essentially one and the same. You can also say nature and God are one and the same. Classic pantheism says that there's one substance and it's all the same thing. So for example, in this picture that I have right here, there's a man, there's a woman, there's a tree, there's a sky, there's a sun, there's grass, bushes or whatever you see. If you can imagine all of that being one substance, everything kind of indistinguishable almost, it's all together, it's one thing. And so there's really no distinction between the created world and God. That is classic pantheism. Now you might think, who believes that these days? Well, my first point here is that it's actually more common than you think. In the previous video, I talked about Stoicism. There's a lot of people out there today that are practicing Stoicism. Okay, it's actually quite popular. Life of virtue, mental fortitude, living in the moment, controlling emotions and not getting all, tied up in knots about the things that happen and kind of going with the flow. Okay, that's the Stoic mindset. Well, Stoicism traditionally and historically has been pantheistic. Probably the most famous Stoic of all time was Marcus Aurelius, the 2nd century Roman emperor, who wrote a book called The Meditations, which continues to be very popular today. He was pretty much a pantheistic Stoic kind of guy. So I mentioned Brooks Spinoza, one of the great rationalist philosophers. He was like all in with pantheism, in his belief. I mean, he's probably the pantheist throughout history. I mentioned last time Albert Einstein was a big fan. He said, that his idea, if he was to be a religious thinker, his God would be Spinoza's God. Okay, that's what Albert Einstein said. And of course, Albert Einstein is one of the most influential people in the world over the last 100 years or so. All right, so other people historically that you may have heard of whose beliefs were highly compatible with pantheism. And the reason I put it that way is that a lot of these people didn't claim to be pantheists, and so I don't want to tag that label on them, but their beliefs certainly were very pantheistic. Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was an American, novelist and, writer. Henry David Thoreau, also very pantheistic as well. Now, what about world religions? If you take Hinduism, Shinto, Taoism, and some forms of Buddhism, you will see some very clear pantheistic elements in those religions. And as you can probably imagine, if you took those world religions, that's a pretty big chunk of the world. And so much of the world, especially Eastern religions, have very pantheistic views. All right, a couple other famous people that you might have heard of. The scientist Carl Sagan, he had views very compatible with pantheism. And also the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung was pantheistic in his views as well. There's something appealing about pantheism. It's very simple when you think about it. If we're all one substance and we're all kind of in this together, it's kind of a kumbaya kind of thing. And, if you're pantheistic, you're probably going to be more concerned about the created world and be kinder to animals or be more environmentally conscious, right? And it also could go to an extreme as well. So those are some positive things. You also, since you and God are basically of the same substance, there wouldn't be a lot of demands put onto you by God because God is not above you. And so the hierarchy that we believe as Christians, there's a great hierarchy of being. St. Thomas Aquinas talks about this all the time, with God way up here, and then from angels and rational creatures like ourselves to the animals. That's all basically done away with pantheism, because it's all, again, one and the same. In many ways, pantheism may be less stressful because you're just kind of going with the flow. And so what are some of the big negatives? Well, first of all, pantheism either demotes God or elevates us, because we become basically the same as God, and so that hierarchy of being is gone. And I don't even know if I'd call it idolatrous, because there'd be nothing to worship. You'd have to worship yourself, but there's no worship in pantheism, because you are God. And so pantheism tends to be very deterministic. Free will is compromised in pantheism. And if you take away free will, you also have to take away love. And so I don't know what the role of love would be in pantheism, because there's no free will, and everything is determined, and so it all seems kind of convoluted. Okay, I hope I'm not misrepresenting pantheism, and that's where the comments are for. This is my reflection on it, and if you think any of this is wrong or you disagree, by all means, let me know. All right, so the second one is idealism. Any of various systems of thought in which the objects of knowledge are held to be in some way dependent on the activity of the mind. There's a lot of different types of idealism. In the last video, I mentioned Bishop George Berkeley, the Irish bishop of the 18th century. Plato is largely considered to be the first of the idealists, Immanuel Kant, and then the German idealists, people like Schelling, Fichte, and Hegel. Those are classic idealists as well. So in the picture here, the first one with the lady, in the woods, somebody like Kant would say, as a transcendental idealist, rather than her discovering the truth in the world, she's constructing the world. Okay, he had this synthetic a priori categories of the mind where we're constructing the world. It's very subjective rather than objective. And then the history part down here has to do more with people like Hegel, where God or absolute spirit is kind of moving to a greater degree of consciousness and freedom, and moving towards some teleological end, which would be the culmination of absolute spirit, right? So Kant brought the subjective element to it. Okay, there's certainly subjectivism when it comes to knowledge. We bring things to the table when we look at things, but he really brought the focus to the person rather than to the world. Okay, and I find that problematic. Kant found a great compromise, so he thought, between the rationalists and the empiricists, and his Copernican revolution in philosophy was huge. It was very, very significant. One of the things about most idealism is that it is teleological, okay? And even St. Thomas Aquinas would be a very teleological type of philosopher, that we are moving towards something. There is a movement of time And it's not just cyclical, that we believe that the final judgment will be the end of time, right? So in that regard, it's pretty good. One of the problems of German idealism in particular is that the God is changeable. And when you have a changeable God, you no longer have an immutable God, you no longer have a simple God. And so the whole notion of God is very, very changed. And I will kind of close this out by saying that perhaps the most significant aspect of idealism in the world today is the influence that it had and continues to have in the world. For example, Immanuel Kant hugely influenced people like Fichte and Schelling and Hegel. And if you look at the history, like for example, I'm reading the history of Russian philosophy right now. And if you look at Russia in the 19th century, the German idealists, particularly Schelling and Hegel, were hugely influential. If you look at Karl Marx's two favorite philosophers were Ludwig Feuerbach, who I won't talk about in this video, and also Georg Hegel. So if we see the obvious impact of Marxism, communism in the world over the last 100 years, this is directly related to idealism. All right, so we can't ignore the impact of idealism, even though people may not claim to be idealists today. The effect of idealism is huge in the world today. So what's the answer? The answer is studying good philosophy. In 1879, Pope Leo XIII put out an encyclical called Aeterni Patris, where he said we need to have a restoration of Christian philosophy according to the mind of St. Thomas Aquinas. And so the reason why, pantheism and idealism matter is that they continue to be very significant in our world today and problematic in many ways. And what is the solution? Well, we got to get back to St. Thomas Aquinas and a good, solid Christian philosophy. Thanks for watching. God bless you.